It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Let's take a look at 5 cards that have been brought back to life in the Hearthstone meta with some help from some special exclusive statistics from hsreplay.net. Up first here, and in no particular order, we have the Tundra Rhino, which in the 30-day period before Rastakhan's Rumble was only showing up in 0.7% of decks. But in the period since Rastakhan's Rumble's release, this is now in 3.6% of decks and actually still appears to be climbing in that percentage up to today. So if you looked at it now, it would be much higher than 3.6 in the last week or two, for instance. And you might be wondering why Tundra Rhino regained so much popularity. And I think that's because Scavenging Hyena got more popular, and in fact might be on this video too. But essentially, with a card like Scavenging Hyena, if you can play that alongside Spring Paw and a Lynx or an Unleash the Hounds and create a really big Hyena, you can do some pretty scary things with 7, 8, 9 mana. Beyond that, the Spellstone is still very popular in Hunter with the rise of Secret Hunter's popularity, and that means sometimes a 10 mana turn with Rhino into Spellstone can kill you, like it did me last night, and I'm still feeling a little salty about it. So essentially, with the rise of Midrange Hunter, Secret Hunter, Tundra Rhino gaining a lot of ground, giving things charge is scary. We know charge is such an impactful mechanic that Blizzard's pretty much turned away from it in card design these days. So for a basic card like this one that enables some sneaky, crazy opportunities for Hunter, not too much of a surprise in this era of Hunter to see Tundra Rhino. Up next here, we have Call to Arms for Paladin, which wasn't only 0.5% of decks, but now almost 4% of decks. And that's because it's a part of OTK Uther Paladin, which is gaining a lot of momentum right now in Hearthstone. So essentially, this one's good for 2 reasons. It helps you pull out things like Wild Pyromancer sometimes to clear an opponent's board to help you stay alive long enough to get to your OTK. Beyond that, it's just really good at filtering out your deck. It pulls 3 cards out of your deck, which means you draw into your win conditions and your combo pieces much faster than you otherwise might. So it's the perfect fit, particularly if it gets Loot Hoarders, which draw you even more cards. And OTK decks like that one need to draw their stuff fast enough to make sure they win the game before the opponent kills them. So Call to Arms is the perfect fit. And although this card used to get played a lot more back in the day when it was a part of Even Paladin at 4 mana pre-nerf, it pretty much disappeared after it got nerfed. It's very rarely seen. OTK brought it back to life, but it's also actually being played in that new Secret Paladin list, which has just started showing up in the last few days. So it turns out Call to Arms does have some life left after all, and that's why we're seeing it rise back to prominence despite being nerfed in the past. Moving on here, we have the Black Cat for Mage from the Witchwood, previously in only 0.3% of decks, so basically never seen at all. But since the expansion's release, has actually appeared in 7.3% of decks. Now that number is trending downward a little bit right now. It peaked early on when a lot of people were trying odd mage decks, but it has started to stabilize, and odd control mages and even some aggressive odd mages are both utilizing Black Cat to success on the Hearthstone ranked ladder right now. And that's really no surprise at all. This card is just a little miniature Azure Drake. It does so many good things for its cost with a good stat line attached as well. It's exactly what you need in a control deck. An early game sort of speed bump to trade into some small stuff from your opponent that still gets you resources and creates opportunities in the late game thanks to that spell damage where you can do bigger flame strikes and bigger controls with Blast Wave and so on and so forth. So the perfect card. It's a great fit for Mage. It's just got a high power level for what it is. And since Odd Mage is now working, Black Cat's coming back and finally seeing some play. Up next here is Potion of Heroism for Paladin, previously in 0.6% of decks, now in 4.5%. And it's really closely connected to Call to Arms, which we've talked about previously, because this is the ideal cheap cycle card for OTK decks. You see it in both the Uther variety and the Holy Wrath Shirvala variety, because it just fits and it makes sense. It squeezes itself into turns nicely and efficiently at 2 mana. It combos with Wild Pyromancers in a neat way. It just does things that you need it to do, and that's the exact sort of card draw you want, a utility-based, efficient card draw for OTK decks. So no shock at all here that Potion of Heroism has gained a ton of ground with the rise in popularity of these OTK decks. And then finally here, one last card. It's the Scavenging Hyena, and again, connected pretty closely to our Tundra Rhino friend, but really, I think even more influential and probably one of the most important or meta-defining cards in Hearthstone right now, which might be a surprising thing for a lot of people to hear, because you tend to think of like big legendaries and, you know, centerpiece sort of cards to be meta defining. But in a lot of ways, I think Scavenging Hyena has changed and, you know, upended the meta more than other things, just because of the way it interacts with Spring Paw in the early games, creating just monster threats on board and kind of changing the way early games are played. Sometimes just playing a Dire Maul's risky because suddenly Scavenging Hyena gets really scary against hunters as they trade in those Spring Paws. And same can be said for Fireflies, because suddenly this thing, you know, is a 6/4 and you're like, oh my God, what do I do? How do I beat this? So that's why it's become, you know, a part of that guaranteed early game package for secret hunters and mid-range hunters, where occasionally you just get that free win from your Scavenging Hyena. Tundra Rhino combos very nicely with it as well. We've seen both of these cards, despite being around on Hunter forever, and, you know, seeing occasional play. Scavenging Hyena is a card I put into budget decks a lot of the time because it's a cheap way to get some free wins. Suddenly that just works in Hearthstone proper. It's in over 5.5% of decks now. Big time gains here for the Scavenging Hyena, and I don't think it's going to go away. I think people are realizing the potential of this card. Stealing and sneaking out those extra wins is a big deal when you're climbing the ladder. A freebie here and there is really nice, and that's what Scavenging Hyena provides. And there you go, 5 cards that have been brought back to life. Now, I know you're curious about seeing these sorts of statistics and how you might get them from hsreplay.net. Well, I'm going to show you. Let's see what that looks like. So here we are on the homepage for hsreplay.net. We're going to start at the cards section up here, as we often do. And we're using the popularity percentage for cards in this list. You can see here some of the most popular cards in Hearthstone, the ones we were looking at somewhere in the middle here for popularity these days. So if you want to know what a card's popularity chart or graph looks like over time, you can see here Ziliak's pretty much been very popular for a long time since it's released, a commonly utilized card. But if we want to go look at, say, Black Cat, a card that was included in our list, we can search for it here. We can see right now in the last 7 days, I think, is this sample size. Maybe this is the last patch. I don't remember. But it's losing a little ground, only in 3.5% of decks yesterday, but peaked at, you know, 8.63 early on in the expansion, and it's held pretty steady and seems to be, you know, stabilizing a little bit here at the end. It's actually gained a little bit in the last day or two. And you can see all the different odd mage decks that it's included in as well. But you see the giant spike here, and this is actually a logarithmic scale as well, so it's not exactly visually perfect here to just indicate how big of a jump that is. But we go from like 0.2% to 0.8%, so a card that obviously brought back to life with the release of Rastakhan's Rumble and Odd Mage's popularity, thanks to probably Daring Fire Eater. But this can give you a good idea of what cards are gaining popularity, losing popularity. You can see shifts in deck styles a little bit here. Maybe you thought a card was better than it was, and other people are, you know, removing it from their deck lists, and you can follow trends there. But it's just a really cool insight to see how cards gain and lose momentum over time, and I think it's a cool thing to explore. So it's right there on HS Replay. You can browse all these cool stats to your heart's content. All right, so that wraps it up, guys. If you have other cards you think have been brought back to life, I'm always curious to hear about them. If you have insights on why these cards gain momentum, why other cards might have fallen out of the meta, share those thoughts in the comments below. But until then, thank you so very much for watching. And until next time, game on.